Hello and welcome everyone back to Herding Squirrels, a podcast about modern teams and change. Today we're excited to welcome Lucas Liu. Lucas is the managing director at Risecor, a boutique consulting firm focused on M&A integration and carve-outs, exit readiness, process optimization, data analytics, pricing strategy, and AI. And he focuses primarily on private equity firms and their portfolio companies. Welcome to the show, Lucas.
Hi, Brendan. Thank you for inviting me. Happy to be here.
We're excited to have you. Lucas, you have a large variety of work that you're doing with your firm and that you're leading. What is it about this work that you love? Like, what gets you up in the morning and excited to start each day?
I think what I really like is helping solve problems, working with companies, looking at what issues they have, what challenges, what initiatives they're taking on, and helping them get there. Helping that company grow themselves. Simultaneously growing Risecor as well. I mean, the more work we do, the good delivery that we do, it also leads to Risecor being successful as well. So, I really like helping companies address their issues, their challenges, their new initiatives, helping them grow and be successful.
Awesome. Excellent. And there's no shortage of problems out there to be solved. And one of the challenges that we've discussed before the show, but I want to really dig into the first piece that we talked about, which is the M&A integration part. And I've read that somewhere upwards of 70% of integrations actually fail. They fail to hit their targets, and a lot of that is tied to the people side of what happens. What have you seen in your M&A integration work when it comes to helping to drive the people side of change and transformation when doing these acquisitions or integrations or anything in the work that you've seen?
Right. One of the biggest challenges that I see consistently is communication, or the lack of, I should really say, the lack of good communication going out to the employees, the teams, and keeping them informed as to why the integration is taking place, what's the status, what's the progress going on, so that they know. I mean, even if they are not directly involved in the integration work, they still need to know what's going on. You want your whole team, the whole company motivated behind getting this integration successfully completed, growing the business, achieving the synergies. At the end of the day, the success of the company relies on the people, and the opportunity for all of these folks involved is also dependent on the success of the integration. When it comes to communication, we always hear words matter, right? Words matter. How you say something is sometimes more important than what you're actually saying, right? The words and how you say it can be a force multiplier for good or for bad, depending on how you say it. I've been in many integrations, and actually both sides, on the integration side, on the company acquiring and on the company selling. And I don't know how many times many of the issues that come up are self-inflicted because they're not communicating with somebody. They don't think people need to know about something that's going on, right? And yeah, there are certain issues that are confidential still, even after once the integration begins. But for the most part, most of what's going on is not confidential, and you want buy-in from everybody on the team. So you've got to share information. You've got to communicate regularly. It's not just that kickoff meeting at right at day one, or a town hall a month later. Something as simple as a weekly email giving people an update on what's going on. I mean, you don't have to air all the dirty laundry, but highlight the successes, highlight what's coming up, highlight where people can step up and help if they want to, right? The idea is to bring in I don't want to say as many people as you can, but give people the opportunity to get involved. And I am sure during that process, you will identify people that you want to make sure you retain, right? That you don't lose. I mean, we've seen the regrettable losses that happen during integration because people don't know what's going on. People are unsure of what direction things are going to move, what's going to happen with their role. Over communicate. You'll never get complaints about too much information, but you'll always get complaints about, I have no idea what's going on. I'm not sure if my role is going to be here,
Yeah.
right? I've got to look out for myself because I don't know, right? In the absence of fact, rumor becomes fact, right? That water cooler discussion, right? You want to control what's discussed around the water cooler. Assume the virtual water cooler now that so many people are remote these days, right?
It's that Slack channel that you're not in, right? That's the new water
Right.
cooler.
Right. And so, simple things, create a FAQ page that's updated weekly, or, like I said, and the weekly communication on what's happening, what's coming up with the integration, things like that.
Why do you suppose this happens? Because the way you frame this, Luke, is this sounds like a repeatable challenge. Like this is it's happened multiple and many times, and sounds like it continues to happen. Why is this such a big mountain to climb?
You know, Coming from the consulting side, it seems obvious what should be done. But you have to keep in mind, many of these folks who are leading the integration for the company, this is, oftentimes it's their first time, right? They're also concerned about impressing the new boss, right? Whether, the CEO or whatever C-level person, which one is going to be the ultimate winner, called winner, right? Who is going to be their new manager, things like that. I think really it comes down to also, right, the same people who are trying to keep the lights on and do the business, many of them are also now trying to do the integration work. And they are just so busy just trying to keep up and keep their head above water that they often forget some of these, the people aspect, communicating, right? Taking 5 minutes to talk to somebody on their team about what's going on, right? And being remote, many people being remote, it's even easier to forget and miss that because you're not in the office, you're not in the pantry, you're not walking the hallways, you're not grabbing lunch with people and talking to them. All those other types of interactions don't exist. Even with a company Slack channel, you're not having those same types of discussions, right? So I think it's really the lack of experience, which isn't anybody's fault that they've never been through an integration before, and that's where the leadership comes in, right, from the top, and when the leaders are putting an emphasis or a focus on communication, that trickles down, right? And you tell your managers that it's on them, and you give them the information to make sure you're answering people's concerns, right? And answering their questions as best they can on what's happening, what's next. If you don't know, say you don't know, but here's the timeline to possibly get to an answer, or what we're waiting on before we have an answer, right? People can understand those things. What they don't understand is, why isn't anybody telling us what's going on, right? There's many different things, but oftentimes it's just a lack of experience and the amount of time people have, right? Yeah, like I said, the same person that's doing the day-to-day work is also now tasked with integration work, and now they're working more hours than they that exist in a day, right?
Yeah, it really sounds like a prioritization and focus. If left to their own devices, communication is one of those pieces that may just fall to the bottom, right? I have so many things to do, and I'll eventually get to that. And I want to dig a little bit deeper in. I wrote down out of sight, out of mind with the virtual organizations. How has integration shifted in your experience, going from even 10 years ago where most organizations were in person? Now we have, right, many virtual organizations. Have you done virtual integrations, and is the playbook vastly different than companies that are working in person.
Right. I would say most of the integrations I work on now are virtual. People have gotten used to being remote and working virtually, right? COVID forced everybody to change how they work. And, we've only had, in my time with Risecor, we've only had one client that asked us to come on site. Everybody else, all our other engagements have been remote. Because you go to, I mean, unless they have like, all right, everyone's coming together for a strategy meeting, and we'll
Mm-hmm.
go to whatever city that meeting is going to be held in. But otherwise, the truth is, one, the client doesn't want to pay the travel and expense, right? They don't want to pay for the hotel and all that. Um, you go to the office, well, half their team is remote, and a quarter of their team didn't come in that day. So you're doing the Zoom call from their office, right? You're sitting in a conference room by yourself doing a Zoom call, right? And it's great. I always encourage, if there's the opportunity to travel to a client, to go so you can at least meet some of the people. But everybody is used to working remotely, for good or for bad. I mean, I think there's definitely, and I think we all know there's downside from everybody being remote, especially with the junior folks not getting the training that they need.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so many people are remote now that all engagements are remote. And, remotes existed for a long time. I mean, early on in my career, long before COVID, when I was working with teams in Europe, in Asia, right, that's remote working. It's just now it's the norm these days, right?
Yeah.
So everything is, so much is virtual these days. Yeah.
You mentioned before when we have when the communication doesn't happen, one of the main pain points is regrettable losses. What other impacts do you see when that communication piece isn't working? How does that show up in the integration?
You know, it doesn't, you, part of the integration and what is very important is bringing the two teams together, right? You've got the team from the buyer and the team from the seller. And yes, there is going to be synergies, and yes, they're going to most likely cut some headcount, but you've got to bring the teams together. They need to know who each other is. They need to be able to work together. They need to get to know each other. And I don't think there's enough emphasis on having team meetings just to get to know each other. And I'm not saying, it's a 500-person company buying a 300-person company. Let's bring all 800 people together. No, of course not. But you do need to bring a lot of the key people involved in the integration together, right? You need to. There is something that you can accomplish by bringing someone together face to face that you can't accomplish through 10 virtual calls. It just doesn't happen. That trust, that relationship, meeting in person just is so much better. I always tell folks, if you have the opportunity to get together in person, take advantage of that, right? Even if it's just once, because that lays the groundwork for future, contact, future conversations. People trust you now that they've met you, right? Or they may not, but they get to know you, right? And they'll be able to say, "Hey, I met Lucas, and yeah, he seems like a really nice guy," or "I met Lucas, and he just does not know how to manage," or something like that, right? There's upside, there's downside. Hopefully, there's more upside instances than downside. Um, but yeah, it's important for people to meet and get together and talk. You don't get that through virtual sessions. Um, but that does seem, there is a trend to go back to the office, but that's different than being a consultant and working on a client engagement,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's it's such a again, thinking about the amount of change that's happening, right, to a company being acquired, um, outside of the communication piece. How else do you prepare for this? And how do you really get ahead of these challenges early on? It from the folks I've been talking to, it sounds like the cracks kind of start showing up. There's like this honeymoon phase where everything feels sort of great. There's high energy, and then from what I'm hearing is like 60, 90 days in, that's when things are kind of like, oh my gosh. And so you've talked a lot about the communication piece. What else can be done to help ensure that, again, those first 100 days, even 180 days, start going smoothly, and that people are still engaged and still excited, or at least bought in after that initial excitement period?
Yeah, and again, I'm talking from my experiences. I mean, I have worked on some Fortune 500 integrations, but a lot of my more recent work has been private equity portfolio companies, sort of middle market and down. Um, when I get involved, when we're brought in, and we try to get brought in, prior to the close, and help due diligence so that we can understand better and plan the integration better. Um, what I try to understand first is what is the shift in power dynamics that's going to come, right? Who is going to be the new CEO? Who is going to be the new COO, head of HR, so on and so forth, and understand their style. Understand, is what was, what are the synergies expected out of this acquisition, and is the acquired company doing something better than the company that's doing the acquiring? And that's one of the reasons, right? So there's going to be that big change in dynamics and things like that. So I try to understand what are some of the complexities that are going to be introduced up front. Understand who I'll call the influencers. The influencers aren't just the C-level people. It goes all the way down, right? And understand who they are and how they're being involved. What are the sensitivities? What if the CEO that's being replaced? What is the plan for that person? Are they leaving 30 days after? Are they going to? I've seen instances where they move into head of transformation, or they become head of the integration for the whole, representing the whole company, right? And then I wind up working closely with that person during the whole process. What's happening with all. I think it's so important to understand what does that power dynamic look like after the close. Who do you need to understand, and then how do you help with that communication? Often we're viewed, when we come in as the outside consultant, we're viewed as the neutral party, right? The PE firm has brought us in or recommended us to be brought in. We get brought in, but the company being acquired and their folks, they know we're the outside consultants, right? So we're more in that neutral space. And I've had times where pre-close, even before the close, the buyer, senior management from the buyer or the company being bought has reached out to me saying, Lucas, we're feeling this, we're seeing that. How do we make sure our concerns or our input is being heard, right? And to me, right there's a flag. Something is not happening, and then it's up to me to help facilitate that communication, right? Without making it sound like they're they have they're complaining about what's going on and things like that. I mean, it is pre-closed, so they're still a separate company, but
Mm-hmm.
still you want to make sure there's that flow of information going back and forth, and they're being included, so on and so forth. So you know communication right off the bat, and appropriate communication. Like I said, before the close, there's still a separate company, so there's limited things you can do. And I make sure they understand that, there's still a separate company until the close. And then they'll be brought in much more into all the planning and things like that. But it is communication. It is how it's being done, how it's being said. And I look for other early signals like who's being brought in. Is it taking a long time for the buyer to include other people on their own team, right? Instead of, there are like I said, there's power dynamics in all different aspects and phases. Is controlling who gets brought in under the tent sort of a power move, right? How do I make sure we're reaching out to the right people during due diligence, right? rolling up to, T minus, 2 weeks before the close, who's being brought in and informed so we can do the planning. I mean, the more planning we can sort of outline, the better prepared we'll be for close. And then we started thinking through some of the challenges. And so when we bring in the team from the company being acquired, we have things ready to discuss with them and to include them on, instead of, okay, everyone starts spitballing what we need to do and plan for, right? Have a framework, have an outline prepared for all of that, because the more organized, the more communication, you build trust much faster. And all of this is around, trust, right? People, want to trust whoever they're talking to and whoever's leading the integration, things like that, right? Hey, you use SAP, we use NetSuite. What happens to all of those folks who only know how to use NetSuite, right? Things like that, right? I mean, there is going to be some of that, and inevitably headcount reductions. And yes, you rationalize which systems you're going to go with, right? Which sales team winds up with certain clients, right? There might have to be some transitioning, things like that. Which vendors are you going to go with, right? Somebody's had a relationship for 10 years with a certain vendor, and that vendor may be going away, and that person's going to be concerned. Well, what's their role going to be, right? Some of that is just inevitable. It's just the nature of the beast, and you have to deal with it. In the morning, we all wake up, we put on our big boy, big girl pants and go to work, right? But there are ways to handle that, and communicating early is one of them. And everybody understands there's certain things that are confidential and can't be discussed until a later point, or something has to be, a goal has to be achieved or something before that next conversation can start. But you have to share that information, right? We aren't going to be discussing that until X happens, right? And people may not like the answer they hear, but at least they know what is going on and why, right? Versus silence.
They have
Right.
clarity. They at least know.
Yes,
Yeah.
clarity,
Yeah.
right? Just like you would want clarity if you were on that side of the conversation. So people want to hear all that, what's
Yeah.
going on, right?
I love how you use the term influencers earlier. Tell me a little bit more about how do you identify the influencers? You said it's not just a role and title necessarily, right? It could be many different folks. How do you identify them? And how do you utilize that? Like, do you have like an influencer strategy? Like, how does that tie into the plan of a good integration?
Right. Well, one of the things I ask, so when you go in and you have your 15, 20 different work streams that are going, finance, HR, procurement, IT, legal, risk, so on and so forth, right? One of the questions I ask the heads of those work streams, the heads of those groups are, tell me who are the one or two non-managers, well, even managers, that you think has a good pulse on the organization, on your team, that people, informally listen to. And it doesn't have to be a manager. It could be a junior person who is just very tuned in to what's going on, or, is very helpful to others, right? And just has that rapport, right? Who are those key people? And I'm not talking about key person risk. I'm just talking about, who are those people that are just out there and have relationships with all different people, right? Just out of their personality. Or maybe they are just a star performer because they can get along with all different types of people. So I want to know who those people are. And those are also generally people you don't want to lose, right? So if you include them in the decision making, I won't say you're never ensuring, but you're increasing the probability that person stays, right? And so you want to know all that information. I want to know that information, right? Because those might be people as the helping integrate the company, as head of the IMO or what have you. Those are people I want to know that are going to make my job easier, right? Things like that. So identifying those people, and everybody knows about the retention packages that the senior people are going to get to make sure they stay on, even the ones that are going to be let go 3 months afterwards, whatever it is. Those retention packages often don't trickle down too far, right? But you don't want to lose a lot of those people that are key to the success of the function. Like I said, whatever those functions are, finance, HR, IT, procurement, so on and so forth, right? So it's important to identify those people. It's not just people at the top that are going to make this happen. It's all the people the people who are doing the actual work, right? That you're going to be asking, okay, I understand you're doing your regular day job, but I also need your help to do X, to get this data, to look at this, analyze this data, pull together these reports, things like that. Help with this system migration, whatever it may be, right? So suddenly their workload is going up for a period of time, right? And they need to be motivated to want to help. How do you tie their performance review, their bonus, to the integration, the extra work they have to do for integration, right? Make sure that all that's being communicated.
Great advice. How so? We always eventually wind up here at this point, but AI clearly part of the picture. It has to be part of the integration now, especially when you're looking for synergies and how things connect. How is that? How are you seeing AI show up in the M&A integration space, and what is it looking like?
Yesterday I was actually talking to somebody about how they're helping the acquirer use AI during due diligence to help, take data from the data room, do certain analysis, look for gaps, help them identify what information might be missing, things like that. Um, you know, with the integration work, um, for us, we have playbooks, right? So we're when we come in, we have ideas on how the integration should play out. We've done it enough times, right? And you bring us in for that expertise. But at the end of the day, you know, AI is not accountable. AI is not responsible for the outcome, for good outcomes or bad outcomes. And for those bad outcomes, right? Somebody wants somebody's neck to squeeze, and it's not AI, right? It's whoever, it's the manager of whatever group was using the AI. But AI can be helped in a lot of the reminders that need to go out, the follow-ups, going through the integration plan and saying, all right, look at what's come up in the next week, 2 weeks. What's the status? What's critical? What's been late? Right? Have AI do that analysis on the integration status. Obviously, it can help populate status reports and things like that. But at the same time, I haven't bought into AI is going to replace everybody. Or not everybody, but 20-30% of the people. I haven't bought into that. You're hearing about all these AI layoffs. In my mind, I would guess the majority of those AI layoffs were because the company overhired during COVID. The market's business has not grown, and they need to lay off. If you announce a layoff because of AI, you get credit, right? If you announce layoffs because you overhired, over the last 2 years and business isn't growing as you expected, you're going to take a hit. So use AI as the cover, right? That's how I think it is. But you also hear, there's a lot of backtracking on AI now, right? You hear, some of the big CEOs out there saying, it's not going to produce those 30% returns that everyone was talking about. You're not, AI is actually getting more expensive. It's not, token costs, right? Token costs were high early on and there weren't many users. So your costs weren't that high, but now token costs have gone down. Everybody in the company has access to the enterprise Claude or ChatGPT, and their token costs may have gone down, but they're burning through those tokens, a year's worth of tokens in 3 months, right? Because they're using AI, they're using ChatGPT for just like how they were using Google, right? Just to go out, find, what time does Trader Joe's close tonight, right? It's that one query just cost 50 cents,
Yeah.
right? Versus had they gone to Google, it costs nothing, right? So, but more as more and more people use it and get access to it, the costs go up, and so it's not necessarily saving costs because um, you know the person, those junior folks they think they're going to replace are the inexpensive ones, right? And so I actually think um, if they're using AI right, they're using it to help grow their business, free up people's time to do more value added work that strengthens the business, helps grow the business. That's the way you should be approaching AI, not looking at, can I lay off 20 customer service people by using AI, right? It should be, how can I improve customer service by using AI, right? And oh, by the way, these customer service people, they know a lot of information on your products and your services. How can you repurpose some of those folks, right, to help other areas, help grow the company? They know the product and they can help with, possibly help with go to market, sales and things like that. Um, so I think the use of AI is, we're going into that AI bubble that everyone talks about, right? It'll rationalize just like we had the internet bubble, and couple years after the internet bubble got started, 50% of those companies were gone, right? The same will happen with AI. It's just a matter of, do you retain those knowledge workers to help grow your business, or are you going to let them walk out the door and then have to retrain somebody else a year later because, wow, you realize I shouldn't have let that person go, right?
I think all great advice. This is fantastic, Lucas. And so, look, we've been chatting for a while. I think we only have time for one last question, and I always love to end with this one, and it ties directly to AI. Organizations. One of the reasons we're talking about M&A integration on Herding Squirrels is because it is such a challenging change environment. Yet every organization right now is going through change drastically because of AI, because of working environments. There's no new normal. It's
Right.
constant change. What would be your advice to a leader trying to help a team navigate through change right now?
What I think trying to navigate through change. Again, what we said at the top of the interview, communication. Explain to people why this change is happening, how they fit into it, let them give input, but also show them how they can improve their position because of the change. What do they need to learn, and give them that opportunity to learn? I mean, yes, all right, maybe some of this change, and again, maybe it'll lead to some layoffs. That's inevitable. You're never going to make 100% of the people happy, right? But you want to make sure you make as few people unhappy, right? So give them the opportunity to contribute, to learn. If there's a transformation going on, how can they contribute? How can they take part versus just being on the receiving end of a change? Hey, this is how your job's changing. We're going to train you to redo something. How are they giving input into how that's being done and get their thoughts? I mean, they're the ones doing it every day, so they probably know fairly well what is working well and what isn't. Um, you know, you know how it goes, right? You ask the manager what they do, and he'll tell you five things. You ask the person what they do, they'll tell you seven things, and only three of them match what the manager told you, right? So there needs to be that stakeholder involvement with everybody. Communication, showing them how they can be accountable and responsible during the process. Change is about people, right? Regardless of how much technology is being used, how AI is being brought in, at the end of the day, it's the people that are going to make it successful or not, right?
Perfect. What a great point to end on. I love it. Lucas, this has been fantastic. If our listeners want to find more Lucas out on the internet, where can we find you?
Well, you can always go to the Risecor website, risecor.com. Obviously, I'm on LinkedIn, Lucas Liu. Wow, I'm trying to think what my personal, but it's Lucas Liu. You look up for Risecor, you'll find me. Happy to connect with people, talk about any challenges they have. Obviously, if they're going or they're thinking about uh, acquiring and doing an integration, or they're carving out, or they're preparing their company for exit, we're happy to set up time and just talk and brainstorm with them and to see if there's something Risecor can help them with. And we're always open to having discussions.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, we'll put those links in our show notes so that folks can just click on them. Otherwise, Lucas, thank you so much for joining us today on Herding Squirrels, and thank you for all of your wisdom and information. We all learned a lot. And thank you to all the listeners for joining us on Herding Squirrels, where we uncover the nuts and bolts of teams.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. This was great.